Welcome to this Grattan Institute webinar. I'm Amy Haywood, Deputy Program Director of Grattan's Education Program, and I come to you today from Wurundjeri lands and acknowledge and celebrate First Nations people on whose traditional lands we all meet this evening and whose cultures are among the oldest in human history. The conversation topic we're talking about today is primary maths teaching, and it follows on from two recently released Grattan reports on the topic. And I'm really excited that this evening I'm here with some special guests. So I've got Dave Stitt, Donna Andrews and Beck Kelleher, who are part of the senior leadership team at the Entrance Public School in the Central Coast of New South Wales. So Dave is the school's principal and works closely with Beck and Donna, who are the school's assistant principals in curriculum and instruction specifically. Between them, they have decades of experience and they're here today to talk about what the work that they've been doing in the last 6 years, specifically in maths. Quite simply, they've transformed the way they teach maths, implementing a systematic, evidence-informed approach. Students are now explicitly taught new content step by step and given lots of opportunities to practice and develop fluency before applying new knowledge and skills to novel problems. And the results have been remarkable. And Dave, Beck and Donna are here to tell us all about how they've made it happen. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Amy, for having us here.
Now, just in terms of structure, I'll spend a couple of minutes just giving a bit of a broad overview of what Grattan's research has been in primary maths, and then we will dive into the juicy details of what did it look like at the Entrance Public School, and there'll be a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So some people have already registered and submitted their questions. That's great. We've got some really great questions that we can answer. There's also a chat function. So if people want to ask a question, they'll be able to. And I've got another team member who, if they can answer it via written, they'll be able to put in some answers as well. So this Grattan work that we've done has been a long project, about 18 months, and we've produced two reports. So the first one was a policy report released in April, and the second one was the principal guide just released in June, and which we're really talking about today. This was an ambitious project. That's probably why it took so long. So we did a new survey of over 1,700 teachers and school leaders. We looked at the literature. We did 7 case studies of schools, one of which we're looking at in detail today. We did 2 international case studies of systems in Singapore and England, and then we also looked at some analysis of teacher background data and then also student outcomes. And the case studies really were the heart of this work, and look, some of my favorite work that we've done and most enjoyable. They really showed us what effective practice looks like on the ground and reveals what it takes to make it happen. So the schools that we've got, you can see them up here, that we had in as part of our research. They're from all sorts of different contexts. So government, independent, Catholic schools, some are in wealthy areas, some are in poor areas, in suburbs and also in the regions. And they were also at different starting points in their shift to teaching systematic maths in a systematic approach. So Wattle Grove over in WA, Bentley West Primary School, and Ballarat Clarendon College in Victoria, and Charleston South have really been at this for about 10 to 15 years. But St Bernard's, the Entrance and Budgewoi, it's closer to 4 to 6 years, depending on the school. And when we looked at these schools, we really wanted to understand if it's possible to take this systematic approach in different contexts and whether the results were still strong. And we found that it was, which was really exciting for us. And one of the things we're really looking forward to talking about this evening. Now, we also found that there were 6 common, features of these case study schools that we highlight in a lot more detail in the principal guide. We'll touch on aspects of them this evening, but just to quickly kind of cover off what they are. These 7 case study schools really had a shared vision for what maths teaching looked like. They had adequate time, including scheduling it into the timetable. They had high quality whole school maths curriculum. So that sequences that learning across years and makes sure that what students are learning builds on what's come before. They also had shared instructional routines that create lots of opportunities for teachers to respond to student learning and clear routines for what students need to be doing. High quality assessments, including assessment schedule and a way to benchmark student progress over time. Additional student support and challenge, which includes further scaffold supports, extension opportunities in whole class instruction, but also a top-up in some instances outside of class where it's needed. And then finally, really that effective building of teachers' expertise through things like coaching, really using that collaborative meeting time, which is really precious during the school week when teachers can get together. So that is a very, very quick, in a nutshell, view of our report, what we've done. And I know that if you're listening in, what you really want to get to is what have the schools done. So I think it is the right time to hand over to our school leaders. And I wanted to start off first with Dave. And I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can get a better look of you. But Dave, it'd be great to just start with, I suppose, the why. Tell us a bit about your school, the context, and why you chose to implement this systematic approach to teaching maths.
Thank you so much, Amy, first of all. And I acknowledge that we're coming from dark and young land up here in the Central Coast. This is an amazing opportunity for us to hopefully inspire some schools out there, and that as we were inspired by other schools, we get to show you where we've come from and some of the things that we're doing within our schools that have really helped our students over the past 5 years now. And I hope that some people can take away from this that if we can shift mathematics in our school, that's possible to be done in some other schools as well. So a little bit about our school. We're situated on the central coast of New South Wales, Australia, about 1 hour north of Sydney. It's a complex school. 14% of our communities sit in the bottom social economic communities. 53% are in the bottom income bracket and 80% in the bottom half bracket of that income. 25% of our students are Aboriginal and 16% of our students come from a non-English speaking background. What that breaks down to is that many of our students, when they begin school, are already behind in their literacy and also way behind in their numeracy skills. Also, we come with a lot more prevalence of language and speech problems. So there's a lot of things that we have to address straight away to bring our kids up to speed. Back in 2018, our school was not performing very well at all. The Sydney Morning Herald does this really awesome thing where they rank your schools according to your area. There's 73 primary schools on the Central Coast, and in 2018, we finished 73. In 2019, we rocketed up the list and we ended up being 70th. So we were sort of at the bottom end. The school had a pretty poor reputation. We were working below our statistically similar schools at the time. And sometimes we would jump above that, but very inconsistent depending on the cohort we had at the time. Our high school transitions, our conversations were very much around behaviour and socialisation, and really sad to say that of the feeder primary schools that went to our high schools, the percentage of our schools finishing that HSC was the lowest amongst the three of those. So our students were moving into high school and failing fairly early because the work was pretty much too hard for them. So they were getting disengaged really early. So I guess our goal was around equity through access to some high quality maths lessons that we really wanted to impart on our school. I want to emphasize that at the time our staff were working really hard in their classrooms, but they're working in silos and often in isolation. You might have heard the expression of a wellbeing school or a welfare school, and I think we really fit that category very well. We were putting a lot of our effort into the wellbeing and welfare of our students, and we needed to shift our focus to more of an academic mindset and let them know that they can achieve and they can do well in school. So that was a really big focus for our school, is that we needed to have that change. And I guess what was actually happening within the school at the time was just inconsistency in our teaching programs. As I said before, there were pockets of excellence going on, but within the school, we didn't really have aligned scope and sequences. So our classes, our grade to grades, the content didn't build on previous learning. It was very hit and miss with what was going on. Staff were actually teaching from outdated syllabus documents. Some staff were having a significant heavy reliance on online resources. So it was really hit and miss with our teaching. And you can imagine on the assessment side, if our classrooms were teaching different things, we couldn't really do that consistent teacher judgment on what we were learning, or even understanding where our kids were at. Often in our classroom, we're skipping that that concrete and that pictorial approach and going straight to the abstract, which meant our students didn't really have conceptual understanding of some of the questions that they were coming up, especially when it came to working mathematically. There was low mathematical language used within our classroom, and I think our teachers were really dumbing our language down just so our students could access some of the questions. But then once you move into the more complex mathematical concepts, they didn't have the language behind them to even look at addressing what they might need to address. One thing that really struck me about the students was they didn't really know how they were going as well. And I significantly remember we broke apart NAPLAN in 2019, and our students on average in year 3 and 5 spent 17 minutes on the numeracy assessment. And that really showed that they lacked confidence in mathematics. They didn't really care about the learning that they were actually doing. And they weren't able to then access half the questions. So for them, it wasn't really valuable, the learning that was going on. And I feel that we had low teacher confidence in teaching mathematics as well, which was reflected in our students' results and our teachers' willingness to, I guess, systematically approach their mathematical teaching. So as you can see, what we were doing just wasn't working. Our results were really well. The school results were really low. Our school had a really poor reputation in the Central Coast community, and we needed to reduce the cognitive load on our students, but even our teachers. We needed to give them a program that they could spend more time in intellectual preparation and not just trying to prepare a lesson and program on the run. Adopting some explicit instruction principles based on Rosenshines, embedding daily reviews, our worked examples, having guided practice, shifting from that individual programs to collaborative planning. That was really important for our school. And I guess the bottom line is we probably need to create a progressive and predictable maths model that we could use for our teaching.
You've painted the picture very comprehensively, Dave. Thank you. It's really interesting to hear, I suppose, just how challenging all of those bits that were coming together. And just, I suppose it does take a lot to really look at all of those challenges and to go, okay, we're going to do something about it. And think not just about the student learning, but also what the teachers need as well. I'm really curious, and I think somebody asked this question actually in the pre-registered questions, what were the steps you took? What did you do first? What came next? If you were to kind of just paint the timeline for us, what did that change look like?
I guess if I had my time again, there's many things I'd do differently. It was kind of unique for us at that time because we were one of the few schools in our area that were adopting an explicit instruction model, and trying to find those schools that may have done that before what was quite challenging. I guess the first thing we had to do was just reflect about where our school was at and look at some sort of situational analysis. One of the first things we did, and I've got some props here, a really great article called Overcoming the Odds, a study of Australia's top performing disadvantaged schools. That was the very first reading we did. And within there are 6 success themes that these schools across, I think it was Victoria and New South Wales, had. The second one of those came up was explicit and direct instruction. And that's the first thing we thought, well, hang on, here's something that maybe we need to investigate a little bit more to find out why were these disadvantaged schools succeeding because of that. Luckily for us, our neighbouring school, Blue Haven Public School, they were actually 2019 Primary School of the Year, Australian Primary School of the Year, and they had adopted an explicit instruction model. So being able to connect with them early on did give us a bit of inspiration that if they could do something, and they are a similar background school to us, then maybe we could do some things a little bit differently and follow a similar model to them. We actually had Paul McDermott, their principal, and their deputy principal, Dale Edwards, come and speak to our school and just talk about the change it had made to their school and their community. And I think that really built some belief in our staff. And I do remember a staff member, and I think it was Donna, but she can't remember, but she said, well, if Blue Haven can make a significant change like that, then the Entrance Public School can do that as well. And I guess for us is we couldn't do any worse than what we were doing. So we might as well try something that could possibly make a significant difference to our school. We also had to look at our data, what was actually going on. So the only data we actually had at that point of time was our K-2 reading data and our external NAPLAN data. So not being able to produce that sort of information in the school to make a decision around where you might need to change in your pedagogy was quite difficult. So we tested the whole school, and that actually just mirrored our NAPLAN data to say that some of our cohorts were 6 months to 18 months behind where they should be. And that's a significant tail to try and get change and get them into high school and get them achieving there. So that actually promoted some really challenging discussions for our staff, but I think they were necessary discussions to have because we had to be realistic about what we were currently doing wasn't working. And we could then sort of start having discussions around what we are going to do. And we decided that explicit instruction was the way that we had to go, and starting with mathematics particularly, because we thought that would be a really an easier process, because there is a bit more black and white than English in regards to that. We employed instructional leaders across the school, which is something we didn't have before. Traditionally, we'd had them just in the K-2 area. So something unique for our 3 to 6 teachers who had never had that sort of instruction before. And our school, I don't think it had ever had an instructional model where teachers were actually going into classrooms and working shoulder to shoulder and modelling good practice and good pedagogy. We also employed John Fleming. I know he's a Victorian, and he came into our school, and he was, I can't undeniably say that his involvement was fantastic for our school. And if you've ever worked with John, he is very motivating, and knows his stuff really well, I guess. Unfortunately, just as we got John involved, COVID. So that was a really another challenge that happened for our school, because just when we were starting to take some steps on this journey, the key component that we needed to help the students weren't actually there. So, but we took that as an opportunity to do that real background study. We looked at Hollingsworth and Ybarra, direct explicit instruction, and we did chapter studies as a staff and had focus groups talking about what was behind that. So our staff started building that background knowledge around what explicit teaching meant. Now, Hollingsworth and Ybarra are they have their own DataWorks program, but there's really great things in that we pulled out and we use today actually now in what we do. We talked about cognitive load theory with our staff, because they need to have an understanding of the brain science behind that. And we looked at Rosenshine's principles, which have been around forever, but it's about how students best learn. So we use those as the basis to form what we felt would be a good way forward. And then we decided to focus on, we call them warm-ups. I think some people call them daily reviews or retrievals. And that was our first focus in maths, is just getting them right. We also looked at our scope and sequences, and I was saying before, they hadn't aligned. So we spent a lot of time aligning those scope and sequences based on the previous New South Wales syllabus. We've since changed. And then we aligned our daily reviews or warm-ups to that. One thing I want to make a point of at this stage is that I myself, as the principal, I think it's really important that the principal leads this and is the strong person that stands there and says, this is the way we're doing this. I'm going to lead by the front. I'm going to do all the professional learning. I wrote the warm-ups as well. I got my feedback on the warm-ups. Mine was amazing. After 11 feedbacks from our instructional leaders and our teachers, I went into classrooms and taught them, and I had my peer teachers giving me feedback about my instruction as well. But I think that gives validity to what we were doing, and that I was in the trenches with the teachers, and I'm along the journey as well in learning about this pedagogy. We spent a lot of time building capacity with our teachers as well. So having those instructional leaders across the school really helped us do that in regards to working shoulder to shoulder with our teachers. We also established a procedure where every 5 weeks we have what we call them data meetings, but they're also involved professional learning. So it was kind of like that chunking learning. We look at a certain part of the explicit teaching. The instructional leaders would go into classrooms and model them. They would then do observations with the teachers. They would give feedback. They would get feedback from the teachers as well, because to tell you the truth, at this stage, we're kind of building the plane as we were flying it. As much as we were learning as much as we could about explicit teaching, and still are learning, we're trying to put those bits and pieces together at the time. We really agreed across the school on some things around high expectations. John Fleming talks about the 6 givens, and there's I can send them out afterwards, but things we really wanted to make sure we had across our classrooms were create and manage relationships, which is number 1 in our school, full stop. Create engaging classroom displays, ensure high standards of student work, provide appropriate feedback, set a positive classroom tone. You've got to be enthusiastic about what you do, and setting high expectations. And I feel that high expectations has been a really big thing for our school. We set that high expectations with our students, with their work, with the way they respond, but also with our teachers. And we want to lift them up to be, what's that saying around the tides rise all ships? So we're really big on that as well. From that, I'm really jumping really quickly because there's a lot that happened between that, but we did form an initial professional learning community with Blue Haven and Budgie Public School. And from that initial 3-school sort of network, it grew to 5, then 7. And now we have 9 schools across our explicit instruction professional learning community. I can't speak highly enough of having a professional learning community and being able to develop relational trust between schools, because more schools working on the same thing, you're stronger together. We are fortunate to go and visit those schools regularly, see teaching happen in the classrooms, and build those relationships across the school, and focusing on similar concepts together. So we've been doing concept development across our schools. So there's been those professional learning communities that are so valuable. We have a governance in place for that. We have roles and statements in place for that. So we want that to be maintained and sustained for the future to come. Through that network, I was lucky enough that both Dale Edwards, who's the principal at Blue Haven now, and Nathan Forbes, who's the principal at Budgewoi, got us involved in East. And I can't speak highly enough about being part of that project. And whilst we weren't part of the initial groundswelling meeting, which I think Rebecca's going to talk a little bit more about later on, we were part of the first 14 schools who were putting resources towards writing this material for East. And I can't speak highly enough of having that collaboration across the state. Now we've got schools all across the state, and to develop amazing relationships with principals and instructional leaders, to be able to go to schools like Yates Avenue and Windsor South. And we actually did an East meeting today at Gorican Public School, and just to have absolutely high level professional development and collaboration amongst incredibly smart people is absolutely amazing. So that's kind of like been our journey. The key learnings from that, we applied the cognitive science to the classroom. So we did a lot of work in that. We debunked the myths about explicit teaching, because there's a lot out there. So you'll need to do that. And we've really had this sustained focus on implementation, reflecting on what we do, and then trying to improve. And we've worked that inside the systems that we have. There's so much more I could talk about, but I think that's kind of the gist of what we've done at the Entrance Public School.
You have packed a lot down into a short amount of time, Dave. Thank you so much for going through that. And I think there's just it's littered with gold, which we'll dive into a little bit more detail as we go into some of those things. But it's just so interesting. You talked about visiting some other schools at the start of the journey to actually get like a mental model of what does this look like, and is it possible in our context, in our students? And we just saw that across so many different case study schools when we visited them. So really great. I think I'd love to maybe pivot and chat, Donna, to you next, really about, I suppose, if you were going to crystallize and describe what does maths teaching look like now at the Entrance, and, even like what does a typical maths lesson look like? I know you've got something that you want to share, so I'll share the screen for you, but feel free to start off.
Thanks, Amy. So as Dave mentioned, prior to implementing explicit teaching, despite our teachers working really hard, our results were not improving. There was no consistency across our school or even across our stages and classes. So we knew we had to implement a consistent whole school approach, K to 6. So maths is now planned, purposeful, and consistent across every classroom. And it's underpinned by that research and everything we've learned about cognitive load theory and how students learn best over time. So we use this to guide everything from how we set up our classrooms, our structures and routines, to how we sequence content and new learning into those manageable chunks. So we focused on, our classrooms being organised with minimal visual distractions, developing clean, uncluttered slides, and using concrete materials, scaffolds, and maths toolkits in our rooms. One of our first steps was to embed those consistent routines and engagement norms. So you can see our engagement norms here on the side, and they form part of our whole school pedagogy. So we established those tight routines around mini whiteboards and developed some consistent gestures across our school from K to 6. A big thing was time. So we prioritised time, aiming for a minimum of 1 hour of maths every single day. So this includes a 15-minute daily review to strengthen long-term memory, where our students recite, recall and apply previously learned content following our scope and sequence. It wasn't just random. Our explicit maths lessons, they follow a really clear structure. So a great maths lesson at our school is framed by our lesson wheel. So you can see our lesson wheel here on the screen, and is driven by those engagement norms and TAPL to check for understanding. So checking for understanding, Beck and I are going to go on and on about that today, but it's pre-planned and it's threaded throughout all of our lessons. So it ensures that our teaching is responsive So our checking for understanding checkpoints are where our teachers anticipate those errors and then adapt the learning in real time based on student responses. We also talk about a great maths lesson occurs before, during, and after the lesson. So before the lesson, our teachers engage in that intellectual preparation. So they unpack the explicit teach plans, they consider their class, what scaffolds and resources they might need for a particular lesson. This is also the time where our teachers plan that differentiation that needs to be built into the lessons. During our lesson, our teachers work through our lesson wheel. So the learning intention and success criteria are unpacked with our students. We connect to prior learning before moving into that concept development with that aim of developing a really deep understanding of a concept alongside that live modelling of the process. The next phase of our lesson is where the magic happens in guided practice, where our teachers live model a number of problems using problem pairs, bit by bit teaching, and worked examples. So here, our students are given lots and lots of practice, usually on their mini whiteboards, with immediate feedback. After a final checking for understanding, our students move into their differentiated independent tasks where they have lots of opportunity to apply that learning. After the lesson, we then use our formative assessment to plan our next steps, whether that's reteaching or extending our students. We also take that big picture view by evaluating our programs at our data meetings, which we'll talk about, and then looking closely at those content threads as well. I think it's really important to mention here, though, that the consistency that we've built across our school doesn't mean uniformity. So every teacher still brings their own flair and their personality to the classroom. So the structure's there to support that great teaching, but our teachers are authentically themselves, and that shows in the way they connect with their students and how they put their own spin on their lessons. So I think that's really important to highlight.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point, don't you? Because sometimes one of the kind of myths can be that you're following all of the structures so tightly that you've forgotten to be, the human that you are as well in a classroom with your students too. But I was lucky enough to walk around some of the classrooms, and it was so exciting to see that consistency, but also those like individual teachers bringing their own flair to it as well. And I think if you've never seen mini whiteboards in a classroom, I think they're kind of just like a wonder to see, because you can see students all being able to answer the question, and you can just see what the teacher can see, and they can get so much information real time that I can actually use. Do I need to stop and reteach, or can I move on because everyone's mastered it? So I love
the game changer.
I love that engagement norm as well. Now, I know Dave mentioned before, actually, he was talking about East being a game changer, joining that network. And we're about to look at some of the East materials. Beck's going to take us through them. But I think maybe just for those people who aren't in New South Wales or in your specific region who don't know what East is, can you give us a very short snapshot?
Sure, I'd love to. So EAST stands for Explicit and Systematic Teaching, and it really began with a bit of an informal discussion really between a small group of principals that all had that common goal of influencing public education with their genuine passion and commitment to deliver explicit teaching as that vehicle for improving educational outcomes for their students. So with that shared vision and that idea that they were stronger together, two of the principals at the time, Damien Fennelly and Simon Mulready, really set the wheels in motion for the East Network. And the first project that they decided to undertake was in the space of mathematics. And I do need to shout out here to Elise Mountford. She was elected as the project lead on this. Elise developed explicit teach sequences. Elise does all of the pre-planning for the unit plans, and it's certainly a mammoth task for one individual. So from there is a small but mighty team of writers and editors that develop the unit plans and bring them to life. So all of the East materials and the resources, as well as professional learning, has been designed to assist in the implementation of these, is available on the East Maths team page, and that's available to anyone with a New South Wales Department of Education email address. And it's worth mentioning, I think, here too, that team's page now has over 3,000 members. So it's amazing to see that so many of our schools have access to such a high quality curriculum.
Yeah, and it just goes to show what an impressive grassroots movement, and people are really engaged and want to get on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was highlighted at the conference today too. Everyone was, reflecting on just the magnitude of the network and how powerful and impactful it's become. So it's amazing.
Yeah, well, Beck, let's not leave people, waiting any longer. Let's do a little sneak peek of some of the materials. So I've got them on my screen. Tell me when you want me to, I know that there's a couple of things you want to show people. So tell me when you want me to move on.
Thank you. So the EAST materials form a really important piece of our mathematics practice. So as we've mentioned before, we had the systems and the structures around explicit teaching embedded. So what the EAST materials do for us now is provide us with that consistent and really connected approach from kindergarten all the way through to year 6, or foundation for our Victorian listeners as well. So in terms of what they look like, I'd like to highlight the connection, I think, in our mathematics approach and the way that they support our teachers to deliver that really high quality explicit teaching. So our first point of reference will be over here on the slide. You can see that the explicit teach sequences that I'm referring to mean that all syllabus content has been mapped out from we refer to it here in New South Wales as our early stage 1 or our kindergarten, right through the stages from stage 1 all the way through to stage 3. So the syllabus content has been mapped out, and these connected content threads are connected across those stages of learning. So this allows teachers to go really narrow and deeply into concepts, to see the before and after, and really facilitate that differentiation for their students. So you can see here that the important understanding for representing quantity fractions has been mapped out from our stage 3 syllabus. So there are 6 important understandings for that concept that has been identified by having a look at those syllabus outcomes. These are then, or to support the implementation of these, the content threads are then broken up and organised into termly and weekly sequences. So on the right-hand side, you can see an example of this. So using that overarching explicit teach sequence, a focus A and a focus B has been identified in the week. Now, most unit plans, for an important understanding, as a general rule, have between 2 to 3 explicit teachers. So this focus A and focus B allows for that to occur for this sequence. You can see that of the 6 representing quantity fraction important understandings on the left-hand side, 3 of these will be taught sequentially in our term 2. So moving into what this looks like in a week. So if we can move to the next slide, as Donna spoke to before, we really have that protected time for our mathematics, and that was a big shift in our practice. So focus A and focus B in this example, those unit plans both have 2 explicit teachers. So you can see that the learning intentions are clearly mapped out, and they build on the content of the previous important understanding. These important understandings are further unpacked in the unit plans, and they sit side by side with our syllabus content, which is where we also work in our working mathematically content as well. So you can see here that because each content point had 2 explicit teachers, that left our Friday for that reteach or any revision that teachers have identified during their checking for understanding. In some cases, a unit plan will have 3 explicit teachers, so the Friday or that 5th day also allows for that to occur as well. So moving on to our next slide, I'd love to show you an example of an explicit teach plan. So our unit plans contain all of the information that we need to craft our lessons following our lesson wheel. So the learning intention, success criteria, the relevance, and the prior knowledge has all been identified. And each lesson has a clear purpose statement and a concept explanation. There are questions there to drive live modelling, and there are suggestions for questions to be used in the we do phase of the lesson, as well as facilitating that independent practice with the built-in differentiation. So in terms of how we implement this program, intellectual preparation is so important in guiding the how we are implementing this. So we really factor in how are we ensuring that we are incorporating all of those features of what we consider to be a great maths lesson that Donna took you through. How are we incorporating that and bringing that to life in our classrooms? Because as we know, teachers can then focus on the delivery and focus on adapting it for their class, because we know that in that guided practice and differentiation phase, that's where we're going to see the biggest impact for our students. It's certainly not a plug and play. So while teachers have the program and they can feel really confident in the fact that the syllabus content has been mapped for them, again, that allows on that focus on that preparation for our students. So while we don't have time to unpack it in its entirety tonight, I just thought that I would highlight a few of those key elements that we really consider in our intellectual preparation. Before I'd like to preface it, I suppose, as I mentioned, in New South Wales, our syllabus is stage-based. So meaning stage 3 refers to grade 5 and grade 6. So as such, the explicit teach plans have been developed to be stage-based. And each plan does have an early and late stage focus. However, they're not exclusively to mean that year 5 is our early stage and year 6 is our later stage focus. As we know, every classroom is different from year to year. At our school here, we have a range of grade-based classes. We also have composite classes, and this year we actually have a cross-stage class as well. So we have a 4, 5, 6 class. So what this early and late stage focus does is provide teachers with that starting point for where they're going to aim their lesson. And for that differentiation, now that might be differentiation in the content, it might be differentiation in the level of scaffolding or the complexity of that working mathematically skill. So that really is an important point for teachers to consider in our differentiation. The next thing to consider, and I would like to highlight, is that success criteria as part of our unit plans. The success criteria shows students how they will achieve their learning intention, and they've been a real game changer for us in scaffolding students in that skill development. So our success criteria is that process-driven and sequential set of steps for students to follow in order to achieve their learning intention. It's like the recipe, if you will. And the great thing about these plans is that if there is a similar content thread between stages, the success criteria will remain the same. And so that really builds that deep skill development alongside that concept development as well. So in our intellectual preparation, teachers will spend time unpacking that success criteria, and will make decisions around those cognitive scaffolds and strategies that will give students. That might be things like their self-talk. It might be the use of consistent gestures that we can use to also help deliver that success criteria. They really drive our live modelling as well and provide that extra level of scaffolding for students during that guided and that independent practice. From here, our next really important consideration is that concept development to begin our I do phase of our lesson. So the concept development is explaining that main idea or the concept that's to be explicitly taught and explained. So we'll plan out which definitions that we'll present to the students, which visuals and concrete materials that we'll utilise. We consider giving students examples and also non-examples, and they're equally important as that's our opportunity to anticipate any misconceptions that our students might have prior to doing our live modelling. So that's that opportunity to alleviate some of those misconceptions. And the goal of that concept development is to develop that really deep content knowledge alongside the skill development. Finally, a really important part of our intellectual preparation is in that we do or that guided practice phase. So as Donna spoke to you about earlier, we utilise a range of methods with this. A problem pair is a good example. So again, our teachers will have a look at the recommended questions in a unit plan, and they'll come up with those problem pairs or those minimally different problems that will then support that gradual release of responsibility. Teachers are making lots of checking for understanding decisions during this time. So as much as we can, we'll pre-plan and we'll anticipate those checking for understanding checkpoints. They're planned and they're purposeful. And as Donna said, we can't stress enough the importance of that checking for understanding. That occurs right from the very beginning of our lesson, even in our learning intention. Do students really understand what it is they're learning today? Right through to the ploughback phase after that independent practice has occurred. So to draw your attention now to the right-hand side of that slide, Alongside the intellectual preparation is our resource making that goes along with these unit plans. Now, development of these companion slides is very much to support the delivery of the lesson, but certainly not to drive the lesson, because we know that that responsive teaching that occurs in the moment during our checking for understanding opportunities, during our guided practice, really should be the key driver of our lesson, not what has been pre-prepared and is saying should be next on our slide. And having said that, not all of our stages actually utilised our slides, but as part of that planning time, our teachers spend that time thinking about what we'll put onto our slides, how we can be really concise and purposeful with that, and targeted to what will support the students. Just to reduce teacher workload, we do this collaboratively. So teachers are on a collaborative roster, and we have that shared responsibility of building that master base deck of slides, which individual class teachers can then take and anticipate any changes or the variety of scenarios that their students might need. And this has been a really great way of building teacher capacity and expertise in that content knowledge as well. And then moving forward to our warm-ups. So as Donna mentioned, we refer to them as our maths warm-ups or our daily reviews. These really support what we knew about the cognitive science and that transference between our short and our long-term memory. And our warm-ups can complement our explicit teaching lessons. Our warm-up content, so you can see our schedule here on the left-hand side, it's really carefully mapped out. So at TEPS, we actually skip a week before revisiting the taught content from the previous fortnight. And that's to support what we know about the Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve, about the importance of that spaced and interleaved retrieval. It also allows flexibility for our teachers in that if they have had to spend a little bit longer on a reteach or revisiting a particular content, it allows that flexibility before delivering that in a warm-up. So you can see that the adding and subtracting example that was on that previous slide. So we taught that important understanding in week 4. So that will be contained in our warm-up in week 6 and also in week 7. Another feature of our warm-ups are those multiplication facts and representing number that's embedded as continuous revision. And it's important to note here too, I think, that when we initially began to create our maths warm-ups, representing number was recognised as a point of need across our school. And we really wanted to make sure that our students had that foundational representing whole number knowledge. So we decided to include that as continuous revision in our warm-ups. However, if class teachers identify another area of need, if their students are maybe demonstrating mastery of that particular representing number concept, the flexibility is then there to add something else into their warm-ups. And in a similar way that we develop our companion slides for our lessons, as a school, we develop a base of, I suppose, again, master slides for our maths warm-ups, and then teachers can tweak those accordingly to the needs of their class. We do have some examples here as well on the right-hand side of what our warm-up slides look like. So all students know why we warm up, and we revisit these expectations at the beginning of every warm-up. Our warm-ups follow that really clear recite, recall, and apply structure. And having said that, our warm-up structure and indeed the way that our warm-ups look has definitely evolved over time, and it's being constantly evaluated both with the needs of our students and also as our teacher capacity and expertise develop and deepen as well. So just to give you a bit of an example, a couple of the major changes from when we first introduced warm-ups until now. Initially, we needed lots of those reciting slides. So that's when students are just chorally in one voice, reciting a definition or a process. They needed that mathematical language. Now we've been able to shift our focus, and now when we're developing those warm-ups, we're focusing on embedding more of those recall slides. Recall slides ask for students to be actively making decisions about our learning. And you can see on the recall slide there, we have hand gestures, our stop and think our tell me and answer in one voice, and then tell me why. And this tell me why is a really important part of our recall. It gives students an opportunity to explain their thinking, and again, provides another checking for understanding opportunity for our teachers. Another tweak that we're making is with our apply slide. So we're really trying to ensure that embedded differentiation, and we use that 30-40-30 model, or the trickier and trickiest, is embedded into all aspects of our apply slides as well. You'll also note the layout. We've tried to keep it really clean and simple, and that is definitely not the way our slides always looked. We had zooming animations and colourful images and teachers taking selfies of themselves holding whiteboards, and all with really great intentions. But the more we know about supporting cognitive load, we've really pared our warm-up slides right back to be clean and simple and purposeful, and they're consistent K-6 as well. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough of the materials, and the way they've really assisted our teachers in building their capacity and their content knowledge. And it's so lovely to see that, our students really view themselves as scholars, and they're engaged and wanting to learn. So that's just been amazing.
Yeah, and it's so good to hear about that impact, and also just to get a sneak peek look at what these materials look like. I think you've actually ended up answering a few of the questions that are in the chat on, say, differentiation. What are some of the materials that teachers are given? I will admit I have done some of those slide crimes when I was teaching that you talked about, Beck. But it's really nice to see a nice, simple set of slides. Now, I know we are close to when we'll have to log off and timing, but there is a question in the chat actually about assessment, and that's great because I know that Donna was going to talk to us. This is your assessment schedule, but tell us a little bit about what assessment looks like at the entrance.
Yeah, absolutely. So a large portion of our assessment is formative. So as we've mentioned, throughout every lesson, teachers are actively checking for understanding. So these checking for understanding checkpoints, as Beck mentioned, are pre-planned and designed to help teachers make those in-the-moment decisions. So we're aiming for 80% of students to demonstrate that understanding before moving on in the lesson. If we see less than that, or if we have 3 incorrect responses, we take that as a clear sign to pause, reteach, and ensure the learning is secure before moving on. So we've had a really big focus on that responsive teaching, not just clicking through our slides or moving through our lesson wheel. You can see here we have our whole school assessment schedule. So this outlines our internal and external assessments across the year. So internally, we use a 5-week cycle of summative assessment using our Google quizzes. So these are short, targeted assessments designed to measure recent learning, designed by our school. Data days and Google quizzes are an important feature of our assessment here at TEPS. So after each 5 weeks, we hold data days. These are another game changer. So these are collaborative days where stages get the opportunity to unpack results at both a grade and a class level. So our teachers engage in really honest and reflective conversations about what worked in their room, what misconceptions emerged, and then what needs to be retaught. So we analyse our highest and lowest performing questions to try and identify patterns. From there, we plan 5-week learning sprints. So these are designed to address specific gaps or misconceptions. They're short, sharp, focused, and most importantly, responsive to our data. So our sprints are included in our daily reviews and also revisited at different points throughout the day. They're not a full lesson. They're just a quick teach and then check. So that might be, during lesson transitions or potentially an exit ticket before heading out to lunch. So you can see here on the slide, we have an example of a stage 3 sprint. So this one was rounding numbers to a specified place value. So our Google quiz results showed an average of 26% of students understanding this concept. So that was identified as one of our lowest performing questions, and therefore an area that we needed to focus on. So the sprints then are communicated to the class, and our stage 3 teachers actually hold a little mini data day with their class, and they unpack their class data and have a look at, the impact of their results on the stage. So the sprints are communicated to our students, and then they're visible in all our classrooms. So all stage 3 sprinted on rounding, and then it was reassessed after the 5 weeks, resulting in almost 40% increase in accuracy and understanding. Our data days are also a moment to celebrate what's working really well and a chance to put faces to the data. So we celebrate our highest achieving students as well as those that have shown great progress. We also triangulate this with external data. So assessments like NAPLAN, check-in, and as of this year, the Year 1 number screening check help us evaluate the impact of our programs and instruction and then benchmark our students against statistically similar school groups and state. So moving forward, the Year 1 number screening check is going to be amazing, giving us that really early snapshot of students who might be at risk of not meeting those foundational numeracy concepts like number sense, number recognition, number relations, and those basic operations. Essential assessment is also another data source that we're utilising at the moment to triangulate that data. So by using a number of data sources, it gives us that really clear picture of what our students are understanding and where they need further support. By combining those data sources, internal, external, formative, and summative, we build that really rich and accurate understanding of our students' progress, and then we can tailor our programs accordingly. Having those consistent assessment practices hasn't always been the case here at TEPS. And I think it's important to highlight that our assessments now are really meaningful and purposeful. They're never just data for data's sake. So our focus is on using those assessments to really inform our teaching, to guide our intervention, evaluate our programs, but ultimately to improve student outcomes.
Thank you so much, Donna. And that I feel like you've gone through an absolute whirlwind of all the things you do. And I think, Beck, you told me I think it's a several hours long PD that you normally do that's actually about these curriculum materials. So you fit it in quite nicely.
Yes.
I know we are running out of time, and I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see your lovely faces. I think we've talked so much about how all of these nitty-gritty details. I think it would be good maybe just to kind of close out on thinking about, I suppose, what's been the impact if you think about students in your school and also the teachers. Obviously, this has been a big change for them. Maybe you all want to kind of give an offering, and then we might close out for the evening. Who wants to go first?
I'll start with our students. So our students are now more confident and more engaged. They know what they're learning and they know why they're learning it. As Dave mentioned before, our NAPLAN time was like average 17 minutes. Our kids would just get on and just click through those assessments. They didn't value the assessments or themselves as learners. So like Beck mentioned before, our kids now see themselves as scholars. So that's been amazing. Another significant impact, as a side note, is our behaviour. So all the structures and, routines and predictability that we've put in place have resulted in this really significant change in our student behaviour. So when our teachers are on class, our negative behaviours are almost zero now, and that change has been absolutely phenomenal. But I suppose most importantly, our academic results. So our school is now consistently performing above those statistically similar schools. We know we're not finished. There's a lot more to do. So at the moment, Beck and I are really looking into that mathematical fluency. But the gains we've made so far have been amazing.
Perfect. It's so good to hear, and we heard it in a few places that when you take this explicit approach, where it's really clear what teachers and students should be doing at any time, it does actually mean that the routines are clear and behaviour might be less disruptive because it's really clear what students need to do to engage. Beck, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a staff point of view, speaking for myself and Donna, we have both actually been at the entrance for 20 years. So we started our explicit teaching journey as classroom teachers, and we've seen a lot of changes in our school over that 20 years. And I can honestly say from a classroom teacher point of view, when we began that explicit teaching of that high quality mathematics, it was such a game changer. I felt so supported in my practice and really had that guide for feeling like I was doing my best for my students because we were trying really hard. As we mentioned before, it was not through lack of trying, but having that really consistent approach has just been such a great support for our staff. We have a mix of staff here now. So we have staff that have been here, some longer than us, some almost as long. And then we have some newer staff as well, newer staff to our school and newer staff to teaching in general. But across the board, everyone feels that consistency. I was in one of my stage 3 classrooms the other day, and they were teaching fractions, and they were up to that fourth important understanding thread. And she was a newish teacher, and she was just absolutely blown away by the depth of the knowledge that her students had in that concept. But also it was such a great booster for her as well, because teachers can really see that tangible success that their students are achieving, and a huge part of that is their lesson delivery and what's happening in front of the classroom. So it's really empowered our teachers. As Dave mentioned, we were at an East Network meeting today, actually, and we took along one of our classroom teachers who has been here for a long time. And, she made the comment that she said, wow, she said, what an honor to work at our school. So that just summed it up for me. It was just such a nice moment to hear authentically and genuinely from her the change that our staff feel in our school. So it's just, it's amazing. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so good to hear. And I think it makes a lot of sense, because I think teachers want to do the best by their students. And if they can really see that in real time,
absolutely,
it's really exciting too.
Yeah.
Dave, I'm wondering if you'll give us like some final words of wisdom or reflections on your end leading this change at the school. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you, Amy. Sorry, that's the cardinal sin, isn't it? I'm actually a little bit emotional hearing our teachers talk, and I know they've touched on the student level, and Donna did that, and Beck touched on the staff level, but I think for a community level as well. I know that obviously there's schools out there that have less disadvantage than us, but for us to be known as the bottom pitch of the school for our community. Our community is not thought of that way anymore, and our school's not thought of that way anymore. We actually have a really good standing in our communities now, and our communities across the coast. So a perfect example is that we were losing kindergarten enrolments, and for next year we've got 75 enrolments where normally we're sitting at about 40 at the moment. So people are starting to choose our school as the school of choice, and not as a default school as well. And that just gives a whole big boost to our community. And the other example is that when parents go onto the social sites now and say, what schools do you think would be a good one? We predominantly get so many people coming on board and saying that the Entrance Public School is a quality educational place. And I think that for me is great, and that we are providing our kids with opportunity. And there's a question about high schools before. Our kids now, the conversation has changed with high schools. We talk a lot of academics now, and about our kids' success. And I know that we are actually connecting with our local high schools, and they're picking up what we're actually doing in classrooms to work inside their own schools. And we're seeing that with some success with our feeder schools as well. So, yeah, I think just in regards to community boost, it's been absolutely phenomenal. Our kids walk around, they're proud of our school, and they talk about being scholars and education. We were a wellbeing school before, and now I think our main priority is education, and I'm very proud of that.
I think that is something definitely to be proud of, and I'm so glad to hear it, Dave. I think that's really time for us, and I know that I've been looking at the chat. Our team member from Grattan, Dan, has been very diligently responding to some of the questions that people have put in there. We've answered some of them, but maybe not all. If you still have a question that you really want answered, please feel free to reach out to us via the Grattan website, and we'll see if we can get an answer for you. I will just say, though, huge thanks. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much, Beck. Thank you so much, Donna, and all of your team at the Entrance, not just for this webinar, but also for all of the work that you've put in supporting your students to reach their best. We couldn't have done this research without your school. We couldn't have done it without the other 6 case study schools that we've worked with. And we couldn't be here tonight unless we had enough excited people who want to hear about maths at 7 p.m. on a winter's evening. So thank you to those who are also listening. If you want to take a little bit more of a look at the research that Grattan does, feel free to jump on the website. We publish everything we research for free up on the website. So thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, and good night.